This is our first meeting of 2019, and we are honored once again to have the teams that are going to the national competition for National History Days. And Jan Kelso, their leader, has put information on the tables that you are welcome to look through so you find out exactly what you're looking at.
It's mostly from Margot.
Mostly from Margot, it doesn't matter. Our next meeting will be Thursday, June 20th, and this will be out of our area. We will actually be touring the LST down on March Street in Muskegon. We will begin our evening presentations. Jen, you want to just say a few brief words?
Just a couple words.
And then you take it over.
I just want to thank you for the honor and the privilege to be able to present to you. When I look out here, I see many faces. We ask for volunteer judges to help the kids get prepared for this aspect, and you can read all of the things that the kids have to do. And it's your time and your critiques and your suggestions that get our kids this far. Today we have 7 entries that are going to be presenting, and 5 of those entries were among the top 2 in the state, which are the ones that will be going to nationals. That's 8 students, and 3 students representing 2 more entries were 3rd in the state in their category, and they are alternates. Unfortunately, the finalists in their categories are going to nationals, otherwise we'd be taking them too. So without further ado, you can take a look at the process that students go through on the white and green sheets. Margot has put together the yellow sheets to give a little bit of an introduction. We're going to start with Allison Chen, who is a 9th grader at Whitehall High School, and she did a senior individual performance. She was 3rd in the state.
My name is Allison Chen, and the title of my performance is The Exclusion Act of 1882. Chinese Americans triumph in spite of legislated tragedy. The exclusion of the Chinese is not urged upon the grounds of prejudice. We have no objection to their religion. I stand with the administration when it declares for coolie exclusion. The question is not a sentimental one. It is a question of national meaning. We should have uniform immigration laws. More foreigners landed on our shores last year than there are people in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Sentiment goes down before such facts. I maintain that it is within the province of the state to restrict immigration if it so desires. Chinese exclusion is reasonable and necessary for at least 2 great reasons. First, because of the effect that unrestricted immigration would have upon our civilization. America cannot digest China. Chinese do not assimilate. We can make servants of the Chinese, but not citizens and soldiers. The second argument is based upon the rights of American labor. Coolie contract labor interferes with the adjustment now going on between labor and capital. In 1852, there were 20,000 Chinese here. In 1877, there were 150,000. First, they were welcomed, but coolie labor is cheap labor. As laborers, they displaced tens of thousands of California working men. They have invaded the manufacturing industry and have replaced over 4,000 white men in San Francisco alone. Coolie contract labor is a direct violation of constitutional law, for contract labor is involuntary servitude. James G. Blaine said, I point to the fact that nowhere on earth, nowhere beneath the heavens has there ever been free labor brought into competition with servile labor. That free labor did not come down to the level of servile labor. This prejudice against immigrants is not unique or unusual. The Irish and the Germans had to overcome this prejudice too. The difference is that the Chinese not only acted different, they also looked very different. They didn't come from Europe. They came from a distant, exotic continent. The color of their skin was different as well. Angel Island was an immigration center off the coast of California. Obviously, we got a lot more Asian traffic than in New York. The immigration process? Well, it's pretty easy. First, potential immigrant has to have at least 2 witnesses. Then they're all cross-examined in different rooms to make sure everything's legal. The questions? Well, they're pretty easy. The standard ones, you know? Like, how many people live in your village? Which way does your father's hut face? How many huts there are? Things like that. What if they get a question wrong? Well, then they obviously aren't who they claim to be. They will be detained and shipped back to China, where they belong. But it's only fair. After all, they aren't coming here to get a better way of life. They're coming to take our ways of life. The only tragedy is that they can still come work here. I came to America to try and make money. Some distant relatives wrote to me and told me of the gold rush here in California. They said that gold was lying out in the streets, yours for the taking. My father came over a couple decades ago. He says that life is good here, and he always sends money home. However, he is getting old, and I want to be able to give my family the life they deserve. But I forgot momentarily about how many people live in my village. I was not warned about this grueling interrogation. How am I supposed to know anyway? Surely there must have been births or deaths in the 2-month journey to here. America has to be the land of the gold mountain I was told of. Just has to be on the other side of this wall. I will work hard and keep coming back. I need to be able to give my family the life they deserve. You see, this is a family photo. Actually, the reason it looks a little strange is because it's made up of cut-up photographs. My family hasn't been together in decades. My father stayed in America during my wedding back home in China and during the births of his grandchildren because he knew that if he left, he would not be able to return. I don't blame him. In fact, I will probably be doing the same thing. You see, the voyage to America was not cheap. I need to be able to repay my debt to the merchant who sponsored me. I hope to send the extra money I earn back home to my family so they can eventually join me here in the land of the Gold Mountain. People always seem to point to Chinatowns as proof that we can't assimilate. However, white landlords refuse to rent to us. The landlords who rent to us usually are Jewish or Irish. We're in a similar situation to ours. Additionally, there have been many violent riots. Can you blame us for trying to be safe? In fact, only 2 years ago, there was a massacre at Rock Springs, Wyoming. 28 Chinese laborers were killed, and 15 more were injured. The people who were attacked were innocent, hard workers who would labor day in and day out, right alongside the same people who had tried to murder them. Beware the yellow peril. The coolies cannot be allowed to stay. Their women are prostitutes and temptresses. Their men are conniving and lazy. They want our jobs, our land. They are uneducated heathens who would not even speak English. We need to support exclusion to keep us safe. This is why I will be supporting the Chinese Exclusion Act becoming permanent. I will not allow them to come within our borders and take over what we have fought so hard for. In 1902, the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended indefinitely. Chinese immigrants were required by law to carry a certificate that said whether they were a laborer, scholar, diplomat, or merchant. Many Chinese immigrants opened groceries because then they counted as merchants and they were able to send for their families. Finally, in 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed, although only 105 immigrants were allowed into the country a year. My grandfather immigrated here. He became a grocer to make a life for his family. Because of his hard work and my parents, I was able to attend a university. My grandchildren will have 1,000 more options than I had, which were 1,000 more than my grandfather. I have hope that they will grow up and contribute to society in a way that my grandfather would have wanted them to. Today, Chinese Americans are all over. They are getting more representation now than ever in business, the arts, education. That is not to say that they still don't face prejudice. They're a so-called model minority. But as we celebrate this success, the immigration tragedy continues in America. The exclusion of the people on our southern borders is not based on prejudice. It is not a sentimental question. It is a question of national security. They are drug dealers, gang members, and more Mexicans cross our borders than our economy can handle. The bottom line is, they come here and are taking jobs from hardworking American citizens who have been in this country for generations.
Does anybody have questions for Allison?
Where'd you hide the teleprompter?
They have to memorize everything.
Wow.
They write their
At
scripts.
some point in time, like the right to own property comes into the picture, and that they were excluded from like owning property for years. And until you have home ownership, property ownership, it's difficult to be a citizen. You might include that somewhere in your talk.
The first quote and the last quote, both politicians?
So the first quote was actually found in a newspaper. The first quote was actually found in a newspaper from like 1903 from a reverend actually. And it was an article that was actually, I found ahead of its time because it not only included that big old speech, but it also included a opposing viewpoint from a respected Chinese immigrant who went to college, got a degree, became a professor, which was really awesome in that time period.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing. And because it showed both viewpoints instead of the propaganda, it was really interesting.
2019 speech, where did that come from?
We cannot hear if you do not speak loudly, do not.
Yeah, put the microphone a little bit closer.
Where did your 2019 speech come from?
The
final one?
A lot of it came from politicians I hear on TV and I find in the newspapers. It didn't have exactly like one definite source. Like the other one was taken word for word from that newspaper, but this one was a little bit more hodgepodgey.
Another comment would be like after years of living in California, the same thing happened to the Japanese, to the ultimate roundup, during World War II. I don't know, Jan, if that's a subject someone has been and discussed before, but it's an interesting subject.
So when you started, I want to know emotionally how it was for you to find all this information and put it together.
I've researched some other darker topics before, and this was a little bit different than those, somewhat, because this was more not recent, because I also researched the Holocaust when I was younger, but it was scarier because
we live in America, and we're told that immigration is immigration and anyone can come in, but that's not what happens, and that's not what happened in our history. And we're not shown that or told that. Like, I had no idea this ever happened in school. I was never shown this. And it was really shocking for me to find that immigration had ever been limited like this based on race before, because the Muslim ban, like, there are a lot of similarities, and that's also very, but it was a little hard to piece together all the witness testimonies emotionally, because they were all so, like, you don't expect legal immigrants, you don't expect them to go through some of these stories, but people with perfectly fine, like, they had everything, they were in order, they were like, their parents were over here, they were legal citizens because of their parents, and they went through legal citizenship processes. And like Wong Kim Ark versus he wasn't allowed to come back into the country even though he was a citizen by birth, because he went out and then he went back in again. All his papers were in order, but he wasn't allowed into the country because somebody said, no, you're not allowed into the country. And like other legal immigrants whose parents were here, like the Paper Sons were there, but there were also people who legally were sent for, and they were either detained for like months on end on Angel Island and interrogated thoroughly. I read an article that said they must have asked thousands of questions to one person, and they were all very accusing and harsh, like, describe your alleged father, or they'd yell at them, this person died, we know that your father wasn't in town in that day, we have witnesses, why did you say he was in town that day? And it was insane. And it was very hard to fathom that and think about how people had to go through that, even if they were legal or illegal, they all had to go through that.
What's a paper son?
A Paper Son is a Chinese immigrant who claimed relationship to a U.S. citizen.
Allison, I just want to say that it's exceptional, and you are such an exceptional mind. But I would like to ask you, did you know right away when you started doing your research that current events and your topic would collide? Did current events inform like your decision to study this topic?
It was definitely one of the bigger, it was a pushing factor, but it wasn't the deciding factor. It made it a lot easier to tie everything in at the end. I'm not gonna lie, that was really
nice. And we have a habit of kind of starting younger to older. So we are next going to invite Amelia Chen, who is Allison's sister. She is in 7th grade, and she will be going to Washington as a finalist in Junior Individual Website. I'm going to ask somebody to hit the lights for us, please, and she's going to share a bit of her website this evening with you.
Hi, my topic was the 1845 Franklin Expedition, which was it was a trip that John Franklin and his 129 crew members took to the Canadian Arctic to go find the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage was important because it was believed that it would provide quicker trade routes to get to Asia. And the British had sent out several expeditions to the Arctic before, but this one was called the most tragic expedition to the Arctic in history. And so I have my website up here, and this is my thesis page. My thesis is actually, even though the explorers failed to discover the entire Northwest Passage, the wreckage of the 1845 Franklin expedition provided evidence, information, and inspiration that enabled future explorers to successfully navigate the North, opening new opportunities for international trade. This really matters because the Franklin expedition, they failed to get, they got about 3/4 of the way throughout the Northwest Passage. They got stuck in ice and they ended up running out of supplies 3 years into the journey. John Franklin ended up dying of old age and ended up getting scurvy and possibly hypothermia and frostbite because they were stuck in the Arctic. And many of the crew members ended up developing illnesses because of the lack of nutrients and of the cold. While they were in the Arctic, all of the remaining crew members fled the ships to go to the nearest Hudson Bay Trading Company outpost, which was over 450 miles away. They were planning to go there on foot because that was the nearest place where they knew that they could get help. While they were trying to trek across the Arctic, they ended up getting sicker and weaker, and they didn't have enough food because they were stuck in a region of the Arctic which is someplace that even native Inuit would not go because there was no game, there were no fish, there were no birds to eat, there were no plants, there was nothing there except snow and ice. So as they were trying to get to Backfish River, which is where the nearest Hudson Bay Company outpost was, they ended up just dying because they didn't have enough nutrients and they weren't supplied enough, and it was over 450 miles and it's hard to get that far on foot. After some of them died, in order to gain proper nutrients, some of their fellow crew members ended up resorting to cannibalism. Even though this happened, well, they were never heard from again. However, the artifacts and maps and records of the Franklin expedition were left behind in the Arctic. And when search parties went to go and see if they could find them, they found these and they learned more about how far they actually got and what they learned about the Arctic while they were there. Because of these things that were found, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen was able to sail the entire Northwest Passage for the first time. He was inspired by the Franklin expedition to go and to find the Northwest Passage, and because of the records that they left behind, he was able to make it all the way through. This matters now because without the discoveries of Roald Amundsen, we could not potentially sail the Northwest Passage once again. Shipping companies are thinking about sending ships throughout the Northwest Passage again so that they can spend less money to do trading. And several countries have made claims to the Arctic today. Russia, Norway, Denmark, China, and Canada have all claimed parts of the Arctic. None of them actually own it, but they say that they have ownership of it, and they filed a claim to it, and it was completely legal. This could cause a huge dispute anytime in the near future, because the Arctic is supposedly mineral rich and the ice is melting up there, so it's going to be easier to access in the future.
happens when you take your website to be judged at
Well-
competition?
On Tuesday at 11:59 p.m., I got locked out of my website so that judging could start. The judges look through all of the websites between the lockout date and the actual competition. And then once you go to the competition, you go into an interview room and they ask you questions about what they saw on your website.
So you don't actually have to present the way you did today?
No, I don't. Yes?
What kind of minerals might be under contention for the owners, so-called owners?
Well, I read that there could be oil, there could be a lot of oil in the Arctic, which is a very valuable resource for us, even though it shouldn't be, because we should be using reusable energy, but we're not. Yeah?
Why did you choose this subject? It's very interesting.
Well, I was searching for topics in September, and while I was looking for disasters and exploration, I found a list of the most tragic expeditions in Arctic history. This one was the first one on the list. And I decided to look more into it because the brief summary that I found seemed really interesting. At first, I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to tie this to today or how I was going to show how this had any triumph at all. But eventually, I found resources that let me know that this impacts us today, and this inspired other people, and it made good things happen, even though it was a terrible event.
Another question, how many hours of research do you think you put into this? Or can you even say?
I don't think so.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay, our next finalist actually isn't here. She's a freshman at Whitehall High School. Her name is Ella Johnson. She called me about 3 hours ago and said, I'm really sick. Do I have to come? And I said, please don't share. So you're welcome. Ella is a documentarian, and this is her first year doing individual documentaries. Up until now, she has done group documentaries. It will be like Amelia, it will be her first trip to NHD Nationals. We'd like to share her documentary. It is on Greg Louganis, who many of us who are over 30 remember kind of watching him all throughout the 70s and 80s, and his advocacy for AIDS.
What grade is she in?
She's a freshman, 9th grade.
Throughout the United States during the 1980s and 90s, people were fearful for their lives, paranoid about contracting a nameless disease infecting men and women all over the country. The gay community was in shambles, between discrimination and death counts rising into the 10,000. They needed a voice, and the public needed to listen. Greg Louganis became a voice for an entire generation of those struggling. Known as the most successful diver in Olympic history, Greg Louganis used his platform to reveal his personal struggles by coming out in 1995 as a gay athlete diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. By associating his well-known face with the deadly virus, which was misunderstood by an entire nation, he was able to overcome his personal tragedy to raise HIV and AIDS awareness, dispel myths about gay men, and change people's perceptions of homosexuality.
Not have to write this book. You did not have to admit that you're HIV positive. Why are you doing it?
Motivate, those people who are HIV positive, to understand that life isn't over yet.
At an early age, Greg knew he was different. In school, he was bullied because of the color of his skin. At home, he dealt with an adoptive father who was only interested in his successes. And internally, he struggled with his own sexuality. His mom decided to put him in gymnastics and dance lessons at age 3 after watching him copy his sister's dance moves at the studio and around the home. Greg enjoyed both of these, but at age 9, he decided to start using his gymnastic skills on the diving board of his family's swimming pool. His mother worried about him hurting himself, so she enrolled him in diving lessons, where he met immediate success. At 11 years old, he made waves at the 1971 Junior Olympics by scoring a perfect 10. In the years following, his wins only became greater, and by 1975, he had moved in with his then coach, former Olympic diving champion, Sammy Lee. Sammy was training Greg in hopes of him winning gold at the 1976 Olympics. When the 1976 Olympics came around, 16-year-old Louganis won silver, second to Klaus DiBiase, Italy's best diver and 2-time Olympic champion on the 10-meter platform. After training with Golden Mine, Louganis' second-place finish felt like a failure. His coach, Sammy Lee, had pushed him hard to beat DiBiase, and losing to him in '76 ate away at his confidence. On stage and in the pool was where he had always felt the best about himself, so he realized he needed a change of pace. In 1978, he accepted a diving scholarship to the University of Miami, where he began working with USA diving coach Ron O'Brien. O'Brien had just moved his program from Mission Viejo, California, to Boca Raton, Florida. Here, his diving success continued. He won many competitions, but he didn't feel he fit in with the team. Rumors about his sexuality swirled around USA Diving. Greg's teammates even refused to room with him because of his suspected homosexuality, so he sought friendship with the Soviet divers. But by now, the name Greg Louganis was globally known, and he was the international favorite to win at the 1980 Olympic Games, which were ultimately boycotted by the US due to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. The boycott only pushed Greg harder. He wanted a gold medal, and he would do anything to get it. After months of intensive training, Louganis made it to the '84 Olympics, winning gold in both the platform and springboard events. By this time, Greg Louganis had dominated the headlines for several years, but as of 1985, the only name making waves in the media was AIDS. People all over the US were being plagued with this deadly new disease that nobody understood. AIDS was known as the gay man's cancer because it was predominantly found in the gay community. There were television specials, newspaper and magazine articles, and political interviews all trying to explain this mysterious illness. Men all over the country were becoming ill and dying painful deaths with no help from the medical field. Many doctors wouldn't care for AIDS patients, fearing that they would contract the deadly disease, and the ones who did had very little knowledge of how to treat them.
There was a lot of fear and misinformation about AIDS. I heard of surgeons who refused to do surgery on patients with AIDS, funeral homes that would not accept the patients after they had died.
In 1985, Greg was gay, sexually active, and aware of HIV, but he felt untouchable. High off with one victory and hungry for another, AIDS hadn't yet crossed his mind. He was striving to win gold in both springboard and platform again, which would make him the only diver in history to complete the double-double. Louganis threw himself into conditioning and practice for the upcoming '88 Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. While Greg trained, the mass hysteria about HIV only worsened. With the new enzyme-linked immunoabsorbent assay blood test known as ELISA, more people than ever were being diagnosed with HIV. Despite these major breakthroughs, the blatant discrimination towards gay men continued. Acclaimed HIV and LGBTQ author Mark S. King shared his experience with AIDS discrimination in 1985 in a recent interview.
Television has got preachers on it who are saying, see, we told you so. Oh, he's HIV positive, he was in the public pool. They were draining pools. You didn't give me an apartment because I have HIV. you won't even bury me. You won't bury me in the cemetery because I have HIV.
In 1987, 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. When Greg Louganis' then boyfriend became ill, the two began to worry about the threat of HIV. Soon after getting sick, Louganis' boyfriend took the ELISA test. It came back positive and he knew he was dying. Greg then immediately got tested, and 6 months before the 1988 Olympic Games, he too was diagnosed with HIV. He was put on AZT. AZT was the only drug on the market to help combat HIV, so with this treatment, he decided it was in his best interest to keep training and proceed on to the Olympic Games. Over the months leading up to the competition, Greg was in a physical and an emotional whirlwind, but he never showed it, keeping up his reputation of diving's golden boy. Louganis finally reached the '88 Olympic Games, and all was going smoothly until the first preliminary event. On his 9th dive on the 3-meter springboard, Greg smashed his head into the diving board, sending a shockwave through the diving nation. Audiences feared that this tragedy would end Louganis' career, but his greater concern was the tragic impact his diagnosis could have on others. Fearing for himself, the other divers, and the medics working on his head, but with Coach Ron O'Brien's support, he put his fears behind him and pushed forward. Keeping quiet and working hard, he managed to again win the springboard and platform events, accomplishing his goal of the double-double. Greg had the world at his feet, but no one knew how close he was to falling. After years of struggling with his public identity, Louganis decided to break his silence. He had seen Ryan White, a young boy who needed blood transfusions, come out as HIV positive, and his immense bravery inspired him to share his story as well. On February 23, 1995, Greg went on the show 2020 with Barbara Walters and came out during the interview as not only gay, but also HIV positive, making him the first Olympic athlete to come forward about living with HIV. His coming out was met with mixed reactions. While many stood behind Greg after loving and following him for years, others were angry that he went on to compete in 1998 with his illness, because they felt he could have infected others, especially after he hit his head. In spite of the varied reactions, Louganis went on to write and publish his tell-all memoir, Breaking the Surface. He wrote to come clean and to encourage others to do the same. He spoke about the secrets he had kept, not only about his sexuality, but about his substance abuse and violent relationships. Greg recalls how all of the threats and mistreatment made him disguise who he really was. Although the gay rights movement was allowing people to come out in 1985, by 1990, many homosexual and HIV-positive men and women all over were still hiding in fear. In his book, he pleads for people to let go of fear and judgment, encouraging the removal of all HIV stigma. Once he came out, Louganis joined many activism groups, including the Human Rights Campaign, and he began speaking nationwide. He inspired other athletes to come out as HIV positive, like G. Wallace, an Australian trampoline gymnast. Today, he continues to work closely with USA Diving, mentoring young students. Greg taught everyone that having HIV doesn't change you as a person. His personal triumph showed the world that you can have HIV, be gay, and still accomplish everything you want. This helped to break through the stereotypes regarding members of the gay and lesbian community. Greg Louganis was the spark that led many other well-known people to come out and speak their truths. He turned a tragic diagnosis into a triumphant stride for all those struggling with HIV and their sexuality.
I'm a diver, I'm an Olympian, I'm also a gay man living with HIV. But most importantly, I'm a person.
Ella chose her topic because she is a swimmer here. I don't know if they still do AAU, but she is a swimmer and has been for a number of years. And also in a health class, they spoke about Greg Louganis and HIV and AIDS and some of the things he's been doing at the beginning of this year. And that was what inspired her to choose this topic, because she connected with the swimming world, and also she was so impressed with what she saw about him. What we'd like to do right now is about going on the website. Mark S. King. Yes. So the gentleman that she interviewed, Mark S. King, is a well-known author and also has a very popular blog. and she had found him and asked if she could interview him. He is an AIDS activist, an HIV activist, who in the 1980s buried many, many, many of his friends. And when she was done interviewing at just before districts, she sent him a thank you copy of her film. He posted it on his blog. Within days, she had 2,000 followers. It's up to, I don't know, somewhere close to 10,000 right now. But even more so is Greg Louganis wrote to Mark S. Smith and actually posted on Mark's website and said that her documentary nearly brought him to tears, and that he was so humbled that anyone would choose to create a documentary about him in this way. And it's just an amazing impact of History Day research and History Day projects. You just never know where it's going to go. So is that the one you wanted me to talk?
Is she also locked out of the documentary now because the judges are looking at it?
In regionals and states, they are locked out at the same time as websites and papers, so they're locked out 2 or 3 weeks early. But for nationals, documentaries do not have to be done until the day they compete, which for her will be 7, 8, 9, 10, June 11th. June 11th. I did have an experience a few years ago. Someone from a different school in Michigan had a documentary. Oddly enough, it's kind of similar topic, and it was about the gay rights movement. And if you'll remember the nightclub in Florida that was set on fire and such like that, that event occurred on either the Thursday or Friday night before nationals. The girl was riding with her mom to nationals, getting information in real time about what was going on down there, added it to her documentary, changed all of her bibliography to include those additional news sources on Sunday and Monday, presented the brand new documentary on Tuesday with information in it that was only 1 day old. Because one of the main things about NHD is, why do we care about it today? What difference does it make in our lives? Similarly to what you saw with Allison's performance.
But if you couldn't see it, down in the corner of the screen is the timing of this. There's a 10-minute time limit. Hers runs 9 minutes and 58 seconds. So she's got to cut something out if she's going to put anything else in to hit under that 10-minute limit. That's a do or die. You're disqualified if you go beyond it.
So the Chicago fire was during 1871, and it was October 8th through 10th. And the Chicago fire appeared to have been started in a barn, but many people think that a cow kicked over a lantern in the barn, but scientists have proven that not real, because it started really late at night, and Mrs. O'Leary wouldn't have been out in the barn then. But after 3.3 square miles of Chicago were burned down, Miss Egan helped rebuild Chicago the most out of a lot of places. They sent a lot of lumber there, and they also helped bring railroad ties and stuff over there to help them build their railroads there, so that they could transport more goods from other places to Chicago to help them rebuild. Our title is Reborn from the Ashes, Miss Egan and Chicago's Triumphant Connection, which we tried to focus, for our board, we tried to focus on Miss Egan's connection quite a bit, because it was such a big thing that happened for Muskegon, and there were 2 triumphs and 2 tragedies. For Muskegon, there was a triumph because they got so much money and they helped their economy grow. But for Chicago's triumph, they got rebuilt after what happened, and that was really big because they might not have been able to be rebuilt if Muskegon wasn't there to help. And the tragedies are they cut down all their trees, and until the 1970s, I think, they didn't start to put those trees back because finally in the 1970s they realized how much they needed the trees. But Chicago's tragedy was that it was burnt down in the first place. So yeah.
My project is about the Nazi experimentation on humans, as well as the Nuremberg Code and subsequent codes that came out after that due to other experiments such as the Tuskegee experiments and the Henrietta Lacks experiments. And first off, you have the 1931 German Code on Human Experimentation, which called for that any experimentation on humans had to be, everybody would have to know what was going to happen to them. And then later on you have the Nazis, and they completely disregarded this, and this is only a couple years later. Dr. Mengele, he did many experiments on many twins. He was mainly on twins, and he experimented on them to try and figure out if he could do different things. He would try and sew different twins together to see if they would be able to work, and he would try and take out organs or take off limbs without any anesthetic and see if it would affect them in any way. And he did also try to take off sexual organs of male and females to see if that would change their gender. And then you also have like Dr. Mengele, who did the sterilization experiments to try and cauterize men and women to make sure that they could stay in the workforce for longer. I actually interviewed Ava Moses-Core, who is a Holocaust experiment survivor, and she went through this with her twin sister. And she was experimented on, and she was very sick. And at one point, Dr. Mengele came in and told her, "Too bad she's so young. She only has 2 weeks to live." Well, she's still alive today. In 1946 to 1947, the doctor trials came on, and 23 doctors were tried in this trials, and each of them did many different experiments. And out of these trials, the Nuremberg Code came through, which was another guideline on human experimentation, so that these experiments would not happen once again. Then in America, you have the Tuskegee experiments and Henrietta Lacks, where the Tuskegee was basically just injecting people with syphilis to see how they would react. And some of the doctors, after they were injected with the syphilis, were like, "Oh, we have no use for them right now until they die, so we can autopsy them." And none of these subjects had any idea of what was going on. Henrietta Lacks, she had a cancerous cell, and part of her cell was taken out. And when this happened, she had no idea that was happening. None of her family ever knew about it until just a couple years ago. But her cells are the only immortal living cells that are still alive today. And many doctors use her cells to try and test different, basically cures, and to test different, what are they called? Different like infections on them to see how they react to the antibiotics. The Declaration of Helsinki came out in 1964, which more defined all of these statements that were in the Nuremberg Code, so that there were less loopholes, because the way that Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks worked, they went through those loopholes that were in the Nuremberg Code. Yet there are still loopholes today, because in 2018, Dr. He Jiankui from China, he did experiments with CRISPR where he changed the DNA of human embryos to try and get rid of HIV. And these twins that he created, really, and changed them, they are alive today. They're about 1 year old. Just recently, I think a couple months ago, there's a new moratorium being called on human experimentation that is supposedly to halt all human experimentation for right now. And I believe that after this moratorium, I believe that the scientific community is going to create another code to prevent genetic editing as well.
In the 1940s, these experiments were going on, and Dr. Mengele was one of the most notorious doctors from Auschwitz, and he did multiple experiments, not only on twins, but also on gypsies and those who had any sort of deformities at all. He was interested in because he wanted to know how he could prevent it from happening with the master race. And so some of these experiments included, he tried to sew together two twins and connect their organs and their blood streams, basically, to see if they would survive. They died within 3 days. He did multiple experiments on the twins, which leads me to my next thing. Ava Moses Kor was a Holocaust experiment survivor who she was actually experimented on by Dr. Mengele, and she said that 3 times a week they would have injections in their right arm, and then they would have at least 5, but that was basically the minimum. And then on the other arm, they had large quantities of blood taken out of their bloodstream. One of Dr. Mengele's things was that he said that the reason he wouldn't get in trouble for what he was doing was that because he saved some of the twins. Just a couple weeks ago, I went in and I interviewed Ava Moses Kor, and she had an injury. She had fallen in the shower, and she had many bruises on her arms and a cut on her tush, as she said. And so she had gone into the doctor the day before I had interviewed her, and one of the things he said was that it's amazing how fast you are recovering from this. Normal people don't recover as fast as you are. And he said that from the experiments that Dr. Mengele did and the injections that she was given actually might have made her stronger, and that's why she was healing as fast. And so in my thought process, I think that's what Dr. Mengele means by saying that he saved some of the twins. And during the Nuremberg trials, there was a trial of the doctor trials, specifically just to focus on the doctors, because they wanted to show out and broadcast to everybody what these people did. They didn't want it hidden in behind the SS officers and those things. They wanted to bring it out. So 1946 to 1947, the doctor trials went on, and they tried these doctors for all of the experiments. Dr. Mengele was never actually tried because he managed to escape. It is said that he was in American Army hands for twice, actually, but they ended up letting him go because they couldn't figure out who he was. So he managed to escape to, I believe it was Argentina, and he died in Argentina. After the Nuremberg trials came out and the public heard about these experiments that were conducted by all these doctors, not only in Auschwitz but also in Dachau, you had the freezing experiments and many other different concentration camps, the public was basically devastated but also astonished that people could do such awful things to human beings, those that believed that Jews were human beings. So they basically demanded a code to come out, which is why the Nuremberg Code came out. And this code was a code of ethics on human experimentation, and the purpose of it was to prevent any human experimentation like the doctors did in the concentration camps to ever happen again. And this was the first international code of ethics to ever be created. And so this was a huge triumph for the doctor world, for those who, and for the public to go against this, and they all stood together to go against this. But yet, I'm not sure when, I can't remember, but the Tuskegee experiments and Henrietta Lacks happened not too long after that, and they continued on. I think it was 1923 was when the Tuskegee experiments began, and then 40 years later is when they finally ended in 1972. And so the fact that America, those two experiments were happening in America, even after America had played such a large role in the Nuremberg trials and the creation of the Nuremberg Code, we still did these experiments. Tuskegee experiments were focused mainly on syphilis, and they injected many of the experiments or the subjects with syphilis to see how it would react. And one of the doctors actually said, I don't know if it was an interview or it was like someone who experienced this and it was said to them, but he said that after they had been injected with it a couple of times, there was no use for the subjects until they died, so they could do an autopsy, and none of the experiment subjects or the widows, because eventually all of them died, obviously, because they had this disease that basically mutilated them. It attacked their internal organs. It attacked, like, you could see it in their face. I have some pictures on my board, and you can see it, how it affected them. And so nobody knew what was going on. And this is actually experimented on, conducted by the Public Health Service of America. And then later on in 1951, Henrietta Lacks went into the Johns Hopkins Hospital because she had some pain in her stomach and she needed to know why. She was actually African American, so at first they said, oh well, you're fine, you can leave now. But then there was this one doctor who was like, okay, I'll do an examination, and she actually had cancer in her ovaries or her cervix. And so later on that year, a couple months later, she had a surgery and she ended up dying. But part of her cancerous tumor was taken out without her knowledge or without her family's consent at all, which the Nuremberg Code exactly says that they have to have consent of the subject, and they also have to know exactly what's going to happen to them. So these cells were taken out, and today they are still alive. They're the only immortal cells that keep on reproducing, and we still don't know why they're just reproducing, but they are. And so doctors have used them. Mariah, can you grab my Petri dish? It's falling. Thank you. It's not mine, I don't want it to break. But, oh yes, they use these cells to test different cures for cancer and to test different diseases and how it reacts to cells and how it attacks them so they can find a cure. But it is still used today, and it was only just a couple years ago when a student was researching this that the family found out that her cells were still alive and in a research lab. After this, the Declaration of Helsinki was created, which was a much thicker document and a much thicker code about human experimentation to focus on more of the loopholes, and it defines many of the words to make sure that people can't get through. Yet now, 2018, we have the CRISPR babies, which Dr. He Jiankui from China genetically edited human embryos before they were born to prevent HIV. That was his final goal, which it's a noble goal, yes, but the way he did it was unethical, and the scientific community is still blowing up about this. The twins were born, and they are about a year old, but there's still no evidence that they are actually cured for HIV because he managed to delete part of the HIV virus, really, but the other part is still alive, and so with that part of it, they can still get it. So basically it was for no reason. I actually interviewed a scientist who works with HIV daily. He's trying to figure out a way to stop Alzheimer's? I don't remember. He's trying to figure out a way to stop that from happening. He works with CRISPR, and he said that there's a metaphorical line that scientists have to not cross, and he geographically crossed this line. And so now just a couple months ago, there's a new moratorium being called on genetic editing, and I believe out of this moratorium there is going to be a new code on genetic editing to stop this from happening again.
Yep, you might need to trade places.
Okay, so hi. My name's Allison. I'm an 8th grader at Whitehall Middle School. And my title is A Bitter Pill to Swallow, Dr. Kelsey's Triumph Hides an American Tragedy. So I'm just going to do a poll real quick. So how many of you have ever heard of the drug thalidomide? By a raise of hands. Okay, so normally I don't get a lot of people who know about this. But thalidomide was the wonder drug of the 1950s. It was such a powerful sedative that anyone who took it would be knocked out in a half an hour. A lot of people think that women took it for morning sickness, but this wasn't necessarily true. Part of my board where I talk about sign of the times, stressed housewives, husbands were off at work, they had to deal with toddlers after the baby boom. This was the perfect drug, and manufacturers knew that. They wanted to get it out to the public, they were greedy for money. Grünenthal, the German manufacturer, they sold it by the millions. Germany was just like gobbling it up. And it was found out to cause over 150,000 birth defects. Popular belief is that America avoided this because of Dr. Frances Kelsey. She was a new drug applications officer at the Federal Food Drug Administration. And basically she got the application on September 12th, 1960 from Merrill, the US distributor. They really badly wanted this drug on the market. They wanted the profit just like Grünenthal had made. But she saw a couple things that weren't necessarily good. They would not give her the details about the rat tests, which if any of you know, that was the most important thing about a new drug application back then. They were constantly lying and tried to get her fired. She, of course, was one of the only women at the time working in the Federal Food Drug Administration. Yes. Anyways, a lot of people just think that we avoided this, and that was the main part of my project. Before I went to States, I totally redid my script a week before. Very stressful, but I got it done. I was really focusing originally a lot on dates. And National History Day isn't about dates. I could sit here and tell you guys all the dates of when this drug was out, when it was taken down, what it caused, everything. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is really the right side of my board. Everything on there, I would say about 50% you are not going to find on Google. I drove up to Canada and down to Cincinnati, Ohio. I have done many interviews, which is why I applied for the Oral History Award. And I just got to hear things from different perspectives. I got to hear from a woman named Gwen Rickman. Her mom took one pill and all 4 of her limbs are deformed. She's not left her house in 3 years. Our government does not choose to acknowledge these people. And really, is the real tragedy. That's why we should care. We should care because our country doesn't. These people have had to suffer their whole lives without compensation. And although Gwen is one of the only to receive compensation, it's not enough. So just imagining what people without any compensation have to go through is heartbreaking to me. And if you go on Wikipedia, it is going to tell you that only 17 people were affected in the US, but the US Thalidomide Survivors Group already has over 50. So really, just in conclusion, I've changed this project a lot. I've gone from thinking it only happened in Germany to realizing it happened in the US to valuing the people. And really, I'm excited I get to bring this to nationals because these people, they deserve the publicity. They need to be heard. I'm very thankful that I got to do this project and get to know people. I'm incredibly grateful because one of my distant family members, he hasn't spoken to us in 40 years. his family thinks that he had the perfect life and that his deformity, which was one arm, no idea that mom took thalidomide. My mom actually reached out to him as a family member because, you know, getting an email from a random NHD person right away is kind of suspicious. And he said that he was told growing up that his mother never loved him, that she took thalidomide, and she actually had to go get electroshock therapy because she was planning on killing him for how he looked. And again, he only had one tiny arm deformity. He was definitely at the better end of the spectrum. So just getting to learn all this has definitely helped me as a person. It broke my heart seeing what Gwen has gone through. So I'm just really glad I get to share it with people, and I've learned a lot this year.
The doctors in America who administered thalidomide, did their patients realize what they were taking? Was there was something in there about your research and whether American women realized what was going on?
Yeah, if you guys go up to my board, there's a section about Dr. Ray Nelson, so I'll just kind of focus on him. So there were 1,200 and I believe 67 U.S. physicians who agreed to distribute the drug. Women were considered the guinea pigs at the time, and I kind of call it the exposing section of my board. Basically, he fake wrote an article. It was actually Merrill supporting the drug, and he wrote another newspaper article, got interviewed, said that all 4 of the women who took the drug knew what they were taking. They were safe, no deformed babies. Yet a month before, I have photo evidence of his signature on a U.S. survivor's birth certificate, whose mom was actually one of his patients. She had no idea what drug she was taking. That's who I mentioned earlier. The mom took 1 pill, all 4 of the baby's legs were deformed. So to answer your question, the woman had no idea. Sure.
Kind of a question for 3 of you. Ms. Chen, you and you are reporting to us. Now you're relatively young, and these are human atrocities. How did it change your perspective on America, on your life, on life in general? I mean, this is a real wake-up call for somebody your age, let alone for my age. Yeah.
This may be a little, I've kind of thought over some questions. I blame the government back then. I do not blame our government now, because our government now, I don't know if ignorant would be the right word, they're not necessarily educated about this. The government back then knew exactly what this drug had done. They knew that over 17 people had taken it. The FDA just chose not to, of course, release all that information. So they knew at the time. They wouldn't let the public know. They just chose to let the world think that America was perfect. We avoided it. Voila. It was everyone else's problem. So I full-heartedly blame them. I feel I'm so sickened by what this drug has done to people. It broke my heart. Just seeing the photos is the main reason why I chose to do this. Our government now, I feel like they need to be educated. That's very unlikely, but I hope somehow. It'd be cool if my board could do that. I just really wish these people would get what they would rightfully deserve. I still love our country just as much. I just feel like this is just another thing that we've done that is quite shameful.
But specifically, at your age, to find out these human atrocities happen, is this something new to you, or did you learn this in elementary, or was this a wake-up call?
When I first researched about the Holocaust, it was really 3 years ago when I did something on the resistance movements, and that was for NHD. And that was basically my first introduction into the Holocaust, but I did not research it very much. Now, like, researching this, while I was reading some of the books that I have read, especially the one by Ava Korb, it brought me to tears. The things that humans could do to other humans. I can't fathom how we can do that to other people. We are humans ourselves, so how can we do that to someone like this? To anyone here? I don't even know what to say. It shocks me and it shatters my heart, And I just pray that it will never happen again, but I also know that it is quite possible, like with CRISPR, it is quite possible that it will happen again.
I wanted everybody here to know that these individuals chose to do a poster display because they would rather not speak in public. And here they are doing wonderful presentations. And when you go to the competition, you have to do an interview with the judges. They ask you questions, but you don't have to explain your project to them, right?
Well, not exact. Well,
They don't have an audience is the big thing, just the judges.
It's really nice. It's just normally 3 judges. You always want a lot of copies of your paperwork. They do not see, when they shut the exhibit room, they kind of take a walk around. It's not really like websites or other stuff where they really take time to look at it. In my opinion, the most stressful thing is walking into a judging room and hearing, now tell us about your project. Causes me a heart attack almost every time. But basically, they kind of want to know about it then, but it's more questioning. That's kind of how they learn about your topic, so more of what you guys are doing right now is kind of like what would be a normal thing. But we also get some practice, like she goes to Montague, but at Whitehall we had to speak in front of like 500 students in our thing, so we've had practice speaking in front of a lot of people.
I didn't get that opportunity, just saying. This year it's actually been really nice going into the interview because the judges have had a couple minutes, probably around 5 or 10, to look at our board and to look through our paper. In past years, in my experience at least, they haven't looked at my board at all, so basically like they wanted to look through my paper first. So I'm just like standing there really awkwardly for 5 minutes because they want me to be quiet, but I'm just like, what do I do? But this year they've had a chance to look through our paperwork and to look through our board, so they have a lot more questions to ask us, which is amazing. I love questions much better than explaining my board.
Yes, 2 parts to your paperwork, right?
Yes. Process paper and bibliography. So bibliography is sources that you use, split up into primary, secondary, and then of course there's like photos, websites, documentaries. Your process paper is the thing that they mainly read. It's 4 questions. Why did you choose this topic? Why did you do your category? How does it relate to the theme? And
How'd you do your research?
How'd you do your research? And you, of course, get 500 words. That's the magic number for exhibits. And you want to answer those, and it's actually kind of nice. The judges read it. They understand why you chose to do what you did. Yeah. Any other questions for us?
I know we're running a little bit long, and I apologize for that. Our last entry that is going to nationals is the only one with anyone experienced at the NHD Nationals, and we have 3 of our 4 have been at least once to nationals. All 4 of these girls have competed in NHD for at least a couple of years. I will let them introduce themselves and their performance.
Hello, my name is Shelby Knoll. I'm Briley Johnson. I'm Avery Christensen. I'm Lydia Jura. And the title of our performance is Saying Bonjour to Equality. The Hello Girls answer the call to achieve victory at home and abroad during World War I. For their role as pioneers who paved the way for all women in uniform and for service that was essential to victory in World War I, Merle Egan Anderson, Louise LeBreton, merit similar recognition as military veterans.
Merle, it's Louise. Did a soldier just present you with a medal? Yes, and I'm so honored. We now get the status and benefits we deserve, only it is nearly 60 years too late. Oh, Merle, I agree. We were the unrecognized first women to fight alongside men during World War I. I wish all of the girls could be here, but only 31 of the 223 Army Signal Corps telephone operators are left. They deserved their medals too, but instead, they were buried with flagless coffins. Do you remember all the fighting? At home and abroad. It was tragic. Remember the suffrage protest? I remember like it was yesterday.
When shall the notes of women's triumph ring clear and strong, while all the nations join in singing freedom's universal song?
Why are so many women supporting the suffrage movement? In the Bible, women's involvement always leads to ruin. What makes these people think it's any different now? It's disgusting and useless. My role is to stay at home and take care of my children. I can't stay updated on politics, and besides, I would just vote for whoever my husband is voting for.
Ladies, these are outdated, idealist President Wilson. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?
I'm sorry, ladies, but if women cannot defend their country through military service, it isn't sensible to let them have a say in those decisions.
I'm sorry, that party didn't answer. Yes, sir, I will connect you. You're welcome. It's been such a long day. Our hands have been darting around these boards like hummingbirds. But we really do love our jobs. This is the best, most well-paid opportunity for women in white-collared employment.
The Army calls telephone girls!
What is that, Grace?
They need women for the war, women operators who can speak French. We all can speak French.
The newspaper states that we would work in between the artillery commanders and our own American doughboys fighting in the trenches. We would train at the AT&T headquarters in New York City. There are mental and physical examinations, as well as language tests.
General Pershing says that our girls are equipped to handle 300 calls per hour. Women can conduct roughly 5 calls in the time it takes a man to complete one. You bet we can. You're tested 100. It can't hurt to apply. I've always wanted to be one of those new women. Ever since my brother was drafted, I've wanted to contribute to our nation's success in the Great War.
We would be the first women to actively serve close to the front lines and fight for our country in a way that no woman has ever fought before.
I, Merle Egan, Louise LeBreton,
Olie DeJour,
Grace Banker,
Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Nemo, he's here. Do you copy?
It has been hard to adjust to the heavy noise of the artillery, even though we have been here for months. I thought that I would have gotten used to it by now. We arrived in France March 1918, and there is no telling when the war was going to be over. On the journey over the Atlantic Ocean, I was terrified that our ship was going to be sunk by German U-boats.
Every day, I go to work hearing artillery shells screaming over my head. I connect calls and translate the words of stressed and sometimes even incoherent men. Once, I slept only 2 hours in 2 days because of how many calls the girls and I had to connect.
We are right on the front lines, but we weren't treated equally right away. One of our first steps toward acceptance by our male counterparts was the adoption of our nickname, the Hello Girls, in the military. It represents a family-like bond between us and the doughboys. However, our pay is slightly different, and we had to buy our own uniforms.
At one point, our barracks caught fire from a bombardment. We continued to transfer calls until we were threatened by the court-martial at Chaumont for disobeying orders to leave. We returned to work less than an hour later. Everyone said we should have left earlier, but how could we? So many lives were depending on us. May 4th, 1918. Dear Mr. President, I am a chief operator for the Army Signal Corps. While my fellow women are fighting for suffrage back home, the women over here are fighting for the country and government who refuse to give us the vote. I know that General Pershing has informed you about our service. I hope that his words can persuade you to put well-deserved equality before flawed ideology. Sincerely, Grace Banker.
On this day, September 30th, as I stand in the Senate chamber, I am speaking before Congress to guarantee women the right to vote. This war could not have been fought without the services of women. Are we alone to ask and take the utmost that our women can give, service and sacrifice of every kind, and still say that we do not see what title that gives them?
worked overseas in France. I would like to withdraw the money that...
Hello, my name is Merle Egan. I would like to withdraw the money that...
Hello, I'm here to ensure the benefits that...
Hello, I'm here to apply for my bonus and tax benefits that I was
promised by the War Department. What? What do you mean there is nothing there?
I did not think that I would be denied veteran status in the eyes of my own government.
I was told that I would be granted $60 when I returned from France.
I took the oath. Who are you to deny me my veteran benefits? January 21st, 1920. Dear Diary, the 19th Amendment was ratified in August, finally granting women the right to vote. However, the War Department has not recognized the Hello Girls as veterans, even though we stayed in France for the Paris Peace Conference.
November 30th, 1942.
Dear Diary, my daughter just informed me that she will be enlisting with the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. I am so glad that our work as first women soldiers has inspired women to take their place alongside men in the United States military.
June 12th, 1948. Dear Diary, Congress just passed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, giving women permanent status in the military and military authority with veteran benefits.
May 1st, 1975. Dear Diary, the Vietnam War just ended with over 7,000 women serving overseas. They obtained benefits and recognition, but we still have not.
November 23rd, 1977. Dear Diary,
the day has finally come. I can't believe it. I know that many of us are in our late 80s. However, I am now at peace knowing that our battle has been won.
I still remember when we won round one. Congress passed the bill and President Jimmy Carter signed it into law.
Yes, Louise, I remember it like it was yesterday. I deserve this medal for fighting in France, but I also deserve it for fighting the U.S. Army for 60 years and winning. Oh, Merle, I know. If we hadn't been recognized and received our benefits, future generations of women may not have been able to triumph. Just look at all the different groups of women in the military, like the Waves, the WACs, the WASPs, and so many more. It all started with our own personal tragedy, but it ended up pushing women to start standing up for themselves.
In 2013, the ban against women in combat was removed by the Pentagon. Now, women are finally allowed to fight on the front lines alongside men.
Well, it was the suffragists that fought for the right to vote at home. It was the military service of the Hello Girls that negated one of the last arguments against women's suffrage.
In 2018, the 116th Congress gave the Hello Girls the Congressional Gold Medal.
Many of the Hello Girls had passed, but their families stood in their places to see what their mothers and grandmothers deserved.
To triumph, they had to go through many tragedies at home and abroad.
From female combat roles to voting rights.
Our Hello Girls have left their triumphant mark on both history and the present.
In the tragedy that was World War I, the Hello Girls had to suffer personally in order to bring triumph for women throughout America.
Awesome. So I thought I knew a lot, but I have never heard of the Hello Girls. And I have no idea what role they played in the 19th vote. How did you learn of them? I mean, is there a book on this, or how did this come up?
We started research. We were all very interested in women's rights, and we realized that it was the 100th year anniversary of World War I. And so as we were reading articles about World War I, there were small little snippets of the Hello Girls, and so we're like, wow, they were kind of lost history. So we wanted to research more about them, and that's when we found the book by Elizabeth Cobbs called The Hello Girls, and we were able to get their personal lives as telephone operators before they went over to France, their stories of when they were over in France, and then their tragic story of when they returned from France and didn't get their military benefits. That was really interesting.
So interesting. What's the hardest question that judges have asked you so far in the competition?
At the first practice judging, it was how does it affect us? But I think we've kind of gotten that one down. Yes.
What's your answer?
How does it affect us? I think personally, for me, it affects me in a way of we see all these women now in powerful places, in politics, in basically every workforce now. And so for me to know that I can go into any workforce and be treated like I want to be there and like I can be there is amazing for me to know, so that I have the confidence to keep moving forward.
And for Avery and I, we can both vote in the next presidential election. So that's really important for us. And knowing that the Hello Girls helped us gain that right is really cool. And I know that when I put my ballot in, I'll definitely be thinking of that. Wow. You know that there are women for president too, so that's really cool because women are running for president and they wouldn't have been able to vote, let alone run for president, without these women.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of respect to like all the women that are in power today. Like, it must have taken them a long time to get to those positions, especially the older women that are currently like in politics and in power. It took them a long time.
As a parent of all of these girls, all of the demonstrators, some of the things that you don't realize is they write absolutely everything themselves. So they do steal information or speeches from books or titles or papers, but other than that, they completely write. I know my girls, these girls have spent hours. I'll bet they have 200 to 300 hours in this whole project, and it's just night after night. There's probably 6 overnight stays to build the set, and rebuild the set, and oh, the set broke, and so they had some fatherly help, and that was awesome too. So again,
time for the painting that we see for like
in the sand.
I'll brag on them a little bit too. I know that the research that they've reached out and spoken to the daughters and granddaughters of these remarkable women that they're portraying.
Yeah, Lydia just talked to one of the daughters of one of the Hello Girls a couple weeks ago, and then she just texted me the other day and said she just passed away. Like, she talked to her just a couple weeks ago.
She passed away a week after we talked to her.
You guys should send it
The
over.
28th.
It's a major challenge for all these people to get down to the time limit and the word limit that you see described on your table. You know, these young women were clocking in way over 10 minutes at first. And they had to, all right, we'll dump this part, or we'll dump that part, or we'll shorten another part. You know, they had to squeeze it all in because they had so much they wanted to say.
And the parents all sweat as we're watching our clocks going, oh, please hurry a little faster, because we're just sweating back there. Because they are disqualified if they go over. It can be a null and void, and that can be your deciding factor, no matter how good it is. So it's that fine line, get as much information in as you can, but not go over.
So we not only thank the young women who competed tonight or presented, we also thank the parents for their heart support. It's been another great May meeting, and we thank you, wish all of you the best as you move forward in your competitions. And Jan, we have taken up some funds for your group. We gathered $86 in cash from the basket that was passed, and the Historical Society is donating another $100, and there was another $25 donation. So we have got, we've got about, how much? Over $300 tonight. So thank all of you. Please visit the cookies that are left. Remember our next meeting, June 20th at the LST in Muskegon. And if you would like a business card to keep with you in case you meet someone who might be interested in joining us, they're on the table with Tom. So thank you all for coming, and see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.